Three, two, one. Well, you'll find us in the Australian studios of JVT Productions. I'm here with my brother Dave. Hi, Dave.
Hi, brother.
Dave and I. Dave and I grew up on a diet of Australian pop music, occasional rock and roll, bit of jazz thrown in. I don't know. Good radio stations. When radio stations were good.
Yeah, when radio stations were the only form of continuous entertainment available.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, well, back then, yeah, we didn't have a tally. I mean, I've got some bullet points on this page in front of us to talk about. But what's your earliest memories of music, as far as you can remember?
Well, you talk about radio. I think the first real memories of radio were those country radio stations, like the one out of Ballarat, whose call sign escapes me, but
probably 3BA, isn't it?
3BA, and I think 3AR, which
3AR,
with us.
Right, yeah.
3LO. 770 3LO.
Yeah.
I guess, and then just those radios that everyone had in their houses, whether it be a leather-clad Astor or a National or Chrysler, whatever it might have been.
I remember our grandfather Maury. He had one of those in the kitchen. He'd take it out the garage with him in the leather cover, but I can't remember what brand.
Yeah, a huge number of D-cell batteries, and probably before that those weird-looking lead-filled things. But I think there was that transition from radio being the only entertainment, and you had a radiogram, to just post 10 or 15 years post TV, where the TV became the furniture centerpiece for entertainment, and so you had a trusty quality transistor radio that you could have playing in the kitchen while you're having breakfast. Take it out in the back veranda when you're working in the garden, that sort of thing. So, and of course it was all AM. I
remember they had the radio stations painted on the dial.
Yeah,
there weren't many radio stations back then, so you pick
right.
3AK, 3AW.
UL was probably the first one.
Warrigal.
Yeah, 3UL, Warrigal.
Yeah. 3MA in Mildura.
3MA, yeah. 3SR, I think, in Shepparton. Whole range. 7BU at Burnie. That was one of my favourites, I think. All those syndicates of radios. But
and then you had 3XY, played the rock and roll stuff, 3DB.
Yeah, but I think in our earlier years when we were quite young, we lived in regional parts of Victoria where the local radio station, local TV station, probably didn't really start transmitting till about 5:30 in the afternoon.
Yeah.
Just warming up for the news via relay or whatever it was.
Yeah, and then they'd have. I don't know what they called it when they turned it off for the night.
The epilogue.
Yeah. Epilogue. Wasn't that the end of Streets of San Francisco?
Oh, I don't know, but the and the mysterious Channel 5A that no one knew where it was.
Oh, really?
But
5A. Yeah, that was always weird on the dial, wasn't it?
So I think radio was that constant that went the whole way through, and of course radio was linked to records and in turn to recorded music. So
I mean that's the thing. My earliest memories of music were probably, was it Tony Orlando, tie a yellow ribbon around the old oak tree?
It's been 3 long years.
Stuff like that, but the mum and dad had on their radio, I don't know, they probably had firmly fixed on the ABC, but, it was a Peter Evans they'd listen to in the morning.
Yeah, Peter Evans on 3.
Yeah, as dry as a proverbial. But,
didn't have much in the entertainment value. Yeah. But was very staid but gave you the facts, I guess.
Yeah, but like you said before, radios, and then we had cassette radios.
That's right.
And another early memory for me is that Daddy Cool record. Daddy Cool being one of the biggest rock and roll bands.
Now you're talking.
Out of Australia in the 1970s.
So I think we had a Sony radio cassette that our grandmother Joyce had bought duty free.
Yeah, right.
In one of her many treks around the world in Asia, probably.
A much travelled woman.
Yeah, and she brought it back, and it became our source of family entertainment for a number of years.
Absolutely.
And I think the first cassettes that it probably played was the Daddy Who Daddy Cool album on Sparmac.
On Sparmac Records with the white...
with a crisscross, like a jailbird type window.
Yeah.
I think the other one we had was the Carpenter's album, from memory.
Yeah, Dad had Glenn Campbell one.
Yeah, that was pretty sad, but...
I like Glenn Campbell.
Glenn Campbell's okay. Rhinestone,
he's great.
A bit of Rhinestone Cowboy.
Yeah,
Or
I don't think he wrote any of the songs. It was probably Jimmy Webb and people like that, or Brian Wilson or something like that.
And so, yeah, and it's probably the early days of us sort of starting to pick up on music, and I think
absolutely, that was they were the seeds that were planted.
That's right.
To a life of sifting through milk crates. And record bars.
Yeah, and I think it was in the days when you would have a hit record of some description in America, and then there would be a local version of it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, their old Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head one, the B.J. Thomas, and then the Johnny Farnham
Johnny
version,
Farnham, yeah.
which was probably a classic example of that. But there was numerous of others where there were local covers done.
Yeah, early on, mid-70s, Daryl Braithwaite did a few versions of
You're My World.
You're My World, yeah. And who was that originally? Sandy someone?
Yeah,
Sandy Shore or something?
Tracks of My Tears by Shirl.
Shirley Strong, yeah.
We'll get on to Shirl a bit later, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Daddy Cool. I mean, at that stage, I think that album, Daddy Who Daddy Cool, featuring the great Ross the Boss Wilson.
Who later on, in the late 70s, early 80s, I go... Monday Rock, that's the guy from Daddy Cool.
Yeah, still had that swagger.
I had no idea. It was like, okay, he's that guy.
That great rhythm section of Wayne Duncan on bass and Gary Young on drums.
Gary Young went to primary school with their late uncle Noel.
In Chatham.
Yep, in Surrey Hills in Melbourne.
And the magnificent maestro of the guitar, Ross Hannaford.
The late Ross Hannaford.
Yeah, had just etched out a fantastic career being a session musician for a lot of great people, and
6'7" or whatever he was.
And looked bust at the South Melbourne market, and down in Flinders Lane and that sort of stuff. So
many an Australian record you would see. The players who played on it could be Wayne Duncan or Gary Young or Ross Hannaford. Or produced by Ross Wilson.
And look, they came up through that burgeoning, late 60s music scene in Melbourne, where you only had to have a couple of mates and half a bit of talent, and you could etch out some sort of.
Everyone wanted to play in a rock band then, didn't they?
Whether it was dance halls, there was a lot of. I mean, we were obviously, we were barely conceived by that stage, but. So back to that album.
Well, we won't go into that.
No, let's not go there at all.
Yeah.
That album was probably...
That was the seminal album.
That is.
I don't even know really what that means, but that's...
It's the one that... You're right, I think you said earlier on, it's the one that sowed the seed.
Or was it the gateway drug to our musical future?
I think it was, it was that first taste of the bad stuff, and we were hooked.
I'll take that. We were hooked. But then from there on, we bought that. We were really into and like every kid was into the greatest, not greatest hits, but what do you call it? The compilation records, predominantly by K-Tel, Polystar.
The compilation, yeah.
Oh, compilation, of course. Yeah.
K-Tel. K-Tel were the biggest, really.
Yeah.
Polystar.
Which were probably through Festival or something like that.
Yeah, although I think Polystar might have been an arm of Polygram or something like that. But really super thin vinyl, not very well made. Radio edits. So
what about Out of Sight, Screamer, Teaser,
Whopper.
Yeah, and all the Rippers, Ripper 76, Ripper 77.
Yeah,
and they were
Apparently there was no 78 Ripper, but
the rippers with the girl's ass poking out of the shorts.
yeah,
that was always pretty good.
in the days when everything was denim.
Yeah. Explosive hits.
75 through to 77, I think, from
maybe.
memory.
Yeah, probably. And I reckon that was EMI.
Because you could tell. EMI was
John Paul Young, ACDC.
A lot of Alberts.
They were always Alberts.
Yeah, a lot of
Alberts
Albert
fans.
stuff.
Yeah.
So
Albert Productions being a big production company out of Sydney. Vander and Young out from the Easy Beats. George Young. Angus and Malcolm's big brother.
Yeah, really.
They produced a heap of records, like Rose
that
Tattoo.
Incubator for rough and ready Oz music, but arguably Vander and Young, really that sort of first almost mass-produced recipe of music, and really on the back of their career with the Easy Beats. So and there was a lot of those. Yeah, and then KTEL created almost an industry with the record selector. Every house had a record selector. Although I don't think we did, but every house did.
We had plenty of KTEL records. We might have had a cassette holder. Yeah, so you could slot them in, you'd spin them around to it. Yeah.
But I think that sort of early 70s, it was very much. There wasn't a lot of, as I understand it. There was GTK and
TV shows,
and a few other bits and pieces, but there wasn't really that sort of seminal teenage music show at that stage that really sort of joined all the dots together.
And then mid-70s Molly and Countdown on the ABC came.
Yeah, so you had three things really happen at once. You had the introduction of colour TV.
Yeah.
The introduction of Countdown, and the Australian music industry really, getting into its stride with, the likes of Sherbet, Skyhooks.
Yeah. Your top 10 was usually 7 or 8 of the top 10 were Australian bands. ACDC. People talk about ACDC now. I always think of ACDC as a band we saw on Countdown.
That's right. They were
amazing.
They played in the Moe Town Hall.
Yeah, they'd be playing high schools at lunchtime. The Melbourne Uni at lunchtime or something like that.
Yeah, that's right. So, and it really, there were camps. I mean, very, very tribal place, Australia. And if you had your own footy team, but you also had your bands that you followed.
Skyhooks with a Melbourne band, Sherbet with a Sydney band.
Yeah, and look, when I was in grade 6, it was the girls were Sherbet and us boys like Skyhooks. But later on, I reckon we
had a foot in both camps, you and I, though, because we liked both of them.
Not sexually, but in terms of our music.
They were good-looking guys, all of them.
Yeah, they were. I mean, they were in Cleo. I mean, Sherbet got their gear off in Cleo.
Yeah, and Sherbet with those cricket jumpers and stuff.
That's right, yeah. And Daryl, good Collingwood man as well.
Hey, Daryl Braithwaite would go on to a great solo career.
Yeah, that's right.
Which we'll probably.
So Countdown was really that. I sometimes think in terms of my musical taste, which are probably a bit more squared box than yours.
Yeah.
I do sort of consider myself to be the Countdown generation, where a lot of the musical roots that I have are really in that 1975 to 1985 period. So so that's sort of those earliest memories, I guess, before we get on to the wasting our money on records part.
I suppose, with musical tastes, we sort of went, you went over that way and I went over that way, but we'd always come back into the middle on about.
Yeah, there was that common.
There was always a fair few that we liked
there was that common
at the same time. I was a bit more hard rock, punk rock towards the end, and you liked more. You liked a bit of Horn.
Well,
I don't know if I should have put it that way, but especially with later on with JoJo's having the Falcons.
There is a trend there of those sort of R&B based.
But bands. We all like Hunters and Collectors. They had a big brass section as well.
They certainly did.
They were a great band. Yeah.
But and just that genre, that general genre of Oz pub rock. I mean, there's so many different bands in that space that
absolutely,
and they were all very, very good in their own right.
Yeah, you think about mid to late 70s pub rock bands. Rose Tattoo, the Radiators out of Sydney.
The
Angels, Chisel.
Yep.
Cold Chisel out
of
Adelaide.
The great Chisel.
Even Midnight Oil.
Yep.
Up the northern beaches of Sydney.
Just an array of, and look, there was that Melbourne Sydney thing again where
My Sex, the New Zealand band.
Oh wow, well,
one of our all-time
the Australasian invasion from New Zealand. Dragon. Dave Dobbin.
Yeah.
We've already mentioned My Sex. I love My Sex. the great Sharon O'Neill.
But we digress. We'll get onto that in the next episode. So, yeah, I mean, going back to our roots, we lived in a town in the northern of the state of Victoria in Australia called Mildura. And 3MA was the
Max Thorburn.
the radio station up there. And this guy called Max Thorburn,
Yeah, mate.
he used to drive around in his little Honda.
That's
You'd
right.
see him on Deakin
Max
Avenue.
Thorburn. I think his daughter's involved in the local paper up there these days.
Really?
Yeah.
Because he was also on STV Channel 8 on the TV as well, I think.
He was one of those very few people that went across from he did radio and TV,
Yeah, he was the...
cross media.
he was the Dennis Walter of his
And I
time?
think he might have even done a little bit of work in the old Sunraysia Daily. as well.
And he used to pronounce it Sunbrazier. I don't know why, but he couldn't say Sunrazier. Whatever. If you're out there, Sunbrazier. All right, it's not Sunraysia, mate. All right? Sunraysia Daily,
Sunraysia drinks,
grapes. Yeah, Sunraysia drinks.
Everything was Sunraysia brand.
Yeah. So we lived in Mildura, what, 3 years?
Yeah, look, Mildura was kind of like a underdeveloped Las Vegas, middle of nowhere.
An oasis on the river.
That's right, oasis on the river,
Yeah.
palm trees, oranges.
Yeah.
3MA, STV8, and there was this sort of feeling of remoteness to a degree.
Yeah,
However,
because what we talk about Max Thorburn, he was like the celebrity of the town.
Max was,
and because we
the
didn't
man
really
we all
have
aspired to
TV, we probably had TV, but as far as celebrities goes, I don't know.
Max was the man.
He was the local guy, and we didn't really know what was going on.
Amazing. You had Homicide on one night, Division 4 the next, and Matlock Police the next one.
Yeah,
so,
great Crawford Productions.
So 3MA, very much top 40. We're talking about 1975 in particular.
Yeah. 3MA, local news.
That's right. Pilot, January, Magic, and what sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there was all that stuff.
Sky High by British Jigsaw.
Yep. Man from Hong Kong.
But there was also disco thrown in. You got Chic with Nile Rodgers.
The early taste of...
what's the
Hustle?
The Hustle by
Van
Van
McCoy.
McCoy, which is a great song.
So a lot of that sort of early disco stuff starting to come through around 74, 75.
Yeah.
Which kind of muddied the water a little bit in terms of that sort of traditional rock music, but certainly in terms of radio quality music, the disco stuff was a real revelation for a lot of people, particularly as the rhythm that went with those sort of songs.
Well, I think you also had at the same time these progressive bands like Emerson, Lake and Palmer and those guys with these huge sounds and
Matter Lake.
Matter Lake were the Melbourne Australian band who were fantastic. Still Point's the great album. Yeah,
one of the first on, if not the first on Mushroom Records.
Yeah,
the iconic
right.
Melbourne label.
Check about do. They were using some pedals,
wah-wahs, the whole lot. It was all happening.
Yeah, the wah-wah. Yeah, that was really...
Yeah, it's great. Still Point. Check it out. It's great album.
They were the Australian version of, I don't know, Focus, who were a Danish, I think Danish or a Dutch band.
Look, they were very influenced by that prog rock that was happening.
They'd throw a bit of flute in with a bit of Les Paul Gibson on high volume.
No, wrong song, but anyway, yeah.
Unbelievable.
So very much progressive, but... in a stable that Mushroom had a lot of R&B based bands, but
then you got Max Merritt and the Meteors, Doug Parkinson, who was a solo singer.
Yep.
He was a soul
Dear
singer.
Prudence.
Yeah, but he also did a great version of the Spinners' "I'll Be There."
Yeah.
Whenever you call me, I'll be there. He was great.
I'll be
I like Doug Parkinson. He probably still sings in RSL clubs every week.
Probably at Marimbula or something like that.
So there you go. That's probably our first episode done. It's funny, I've got written down here Mason Park, Jim Neighbours, because our grandparents who lived in the
leafy enclave of
the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, the inner eastern suburbs of Melbourne,
tram down the end of the road.
I think their musical taste went as far as Jim Neighbours.
Yeah, Jim Neighbours.
Well, golly, Sergeant Carter. Well, he was the guy who was going with Pyle, USMC. He was also a singer.
Yeah, Jim Neighbours. Fantastic voice. Fantastic entertainer. I think.
But I also remember those Jim Neighbours tapes.
And our maternal grandmother, she was right into the Seekers from memory.
She was. The Carnival was over.
Yes. Terrible album.
Oh,
no, it wasn't.
Shocking.
No, it was okay, but we sort of got. She was actually the first person we ever knew with a cassette player in her car.
In her car, she had a Corolla.
A 1972 Corolla with a cassette player.
Yeah, but she was a progressive woman. She was an independent because her husband, my mum's dad, he died when they were all young, and she brought up her mum and her sister,
forged a career on her own.
And once they all left home and sorted their own lives out, she was a quite independent woman. Travelled the world for years.
But yeah, first car that I ever came across with a cassette player.
Yeah.
And probably in an era where you could either get a cassette player or an 8-track cartridge player.
Yeah, well, you could. You know what? I see those in used record stores. Those 8-track cartridges.
Well, none of us ever have anything to play it on. But
I don't know who's using
a furniture piece, I think.
Yeah.
So so I'm not sure we got a lot of musical influence from our grandparents, but certainly.
No, but you know what? I remember our Uncle Ray. Two things. Our late Uncle Ray, my dad's brother, he had Hot August Night by Neil Diamond.
Yep, good lord.
Yeah, and he had a few other good little vinyl. He didn't have a lot of records, but he had a couple of choice ones. He had Breakfast in America by Supertramp.
Yes, he did too. Yeah, it's a great album.
And a couple others, and I always thought that was pretty cool. But Uncle Noel, our late Uncle Noel, my dad's other brother, he bought Dave Living in the 70's by Skyhawks on cassette for his birthday.
My mum was horrified because it had suggestive lyrics.
It's probably up there with one of the greatest Australian rock and roll records of all time.
I think if you follow the classic album trail of Australian music, you're looking at that Daddy Who Daddy Cool album that we referred to earlier as that sort of first big,
of that era,
big
too.
chunk of that era.
Yeah.
And then you're looking at 4 years later with Living in the 70's. It's just like, wow, here's an album that, it sounds so Australian.
And I reckon most of the songs on there were banned on radio.
They were, and that's probably what helped with its popularity. Particularly amongst baby boomers and that post-Vietnam War.
Yeah, well, they had a great song called Horror Movie, which was all about the 6:30 news. Everything on the news is bad, and that's still relevant today. It's still relevant today. I
think it was the first album played on Double J.
Yeah, okay.
Which became Triple J.
Yeah, well, they used to champion bands like that, like the Oils and those.
And it was probably one of the first albums that openly referenced Australian place names as well.
Yeah, right. Especially that a very Melbourne-centric ring to it. Like
Suburban Melbourne.
Baldwin Calling.
It probably wasn't until their third album they mentioned Somewhere in Sydney.
Yeah, Somewhere in Sydney. Exactly. But Baldwin Calling was like our dad. He grew up in that neighbourhood.
Delivered papers, I think, in
so that's
in
all
his
cool.
handlebar heated
Carlton,
bike.
The sunsets over Carlton.
Yep.
He bought his first dope outside the South Yarra Arms, which is now a country road store, I think.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's no longer a hotel, but
when I first
moved on from dope selling.
Yeah, well, when I first moved to Melbourne in the late 80s
dopes,
or mid 80s, it was still a great pub, the South Yarra Arms.
Yeah.
Anyway, we digress. So that's pretty much the roots of our musical journey, I suppose.
Yeah, and look, there was a lot of things that meant that there was Countdown we mentioned, but there was also some, I think from memory, some Australian government policy around the ratio of Australian music on the radio. So
right.
There was a large concentration of Australian music on the radio.
80% of our music was Australian music.
So it's what we listened to and it's what we heard. And surprisingly, there was some. You'd think back now, there's quite a number of songs that were big hits overseas at the time, but didn't really chart in Australia.
Oh, and bands. You hear about bands like Rush, who were a Canadian hard rock band. They were massive all around the world. I didn't hear about them.
Even Journey weren't really that big in Australia.
Yeah, exactly.
So it was the radio was a big part around, and it was really that era where Australia was developing its own culture above the indigenous Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture. It was that sort of urbane culture that was developing. So,
but you could also go and see these bands in a pub.
Yep.
Yeah, on a
very
Friday
small
or Saturday
cover charge.
night. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You could go and see AC/DC playing at a club in Geelong or probably here in Gippsland in
Yep,
the
Oils
east of
for a
Victoria.
small cover charge
Yeah.
in the 80s. So,
Yeah.
and as I think Andy said earlier on,
That's JVT, that is.
JVT. Who is Andy?
Who's this
JVT.
Andy? Yeah.
JVT mentioned earlier.
DVT.
DVT sounds like some sort of
Deep vein thrombosis.
sounds
Yeah,
like
there you
a
go.
chemical you put on your garden. We did spend our childhood growing up in a range of different locations around rural
We did.
country Victoria.
But this particular period was spent mostly in Mildura.
Yes, and
you know.
a little bit before that in Great Western, where
In the
I think
Western
our
district.
father had there was a wire that was strapped across two trees to provide a large AM radio aerial.
Yeah, right.
So they could pick up the Melbourne ABC channel.
That's
So
what you had to do back
amazing.
then. All this equipment we've got in front of us now.
Probably between the water tanks, you know.
All right, well, that's episode 1 in the can, I think, DB.
Thanks.
Sorry,
for listening.
DVT.
Thanks, JVT.
We'll speak to you soon. We'll probably still be wearing the same T-shirts, but whatever.
I thought we may
For continu-
have a costume change.
For continuity purposes, maybe we'll have to change shirts. All right, rock on.
Yes. See you later.
Bye.
Very good. All right.